Welcome to the story of America. Hello, my friends. Today we begin a fascinating journey through the history of the United States of America. This is a special lesson for listening and speaking practice, and I promise to make it easy, fun, and interesting. By the end of this series, you will know everything about America, its discovery, its struggles, its people, and why it is one of the most powerful countries in the world today. Let's start with the big question. How did it all begin? Who discovered America? A long, long time ago, around 15,000 years ago, Native American tribes lived on this land. They were the first people to call America home. These tribes were hunters and gatherers who traveled across a land bridge from Asia to North America. They lived in harmony with nature, growing crops, hunting animals, and building unique cultures. But the story of America, as we know it, starts much later. In 1492, an Italian explorer named Christopher Columbus set sail. He was looking for a new route to Asia, but instead he landed in the Americas. This journey was funded by the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella. Columbus thought he had reached India, so he called the native people Indians. However, Columbus wasn't the first European to reach America. Nearly 500 years earlier, the Vikings, led by Leif Erikson, landed in what is now Canada. But their settlements didn't last long, so Columbus is often credited with discovering America because his journey brought European attention to the continent. The European rush after Columbus, more explorers came from Europe. Spain, France, England, and other countries sent ships to claim land in the New World. Spain focused on South and Central America, where they found gold and silver. England and France started building colonies in North America. These European settlers brought many changes to the land and its people. They introduced new foods, animals, and technology. But they also brought diseases, which sadly killed many Native Americans. This was the beginning of a very complex and painful relationship between the settlers and the native people. The first colonies. In 1607, England established its first permanent colony in America called Jamestown in Virginia. The settlers faced many problems, harsh winters, disease, and lack of food, but they survived. Soon, more colonies were formed, and people from Europe began moving to America for a better life. One of the most famous groups was the Pilgrims, who came to America in 1620 on a ship called the Mayflower. They were escaping religious persecution in England and wanted freedom to worship as they wished. They landed in what is now Massachusetts and celebrated the first Thanksgiving with Native Americans who helped them survive. Why was America so important? By the 1700s, America became a land of opportunity. People came from all over Europe because they believed they could find freedom, land, and a new life here. But this new beginning wasn't easy. Different countries were fighting for control of America, especially England, France, and Spain. By the 1700s, there were 13 colonies along the east coast of what is now the United States. These colonies were divided into 3 regions. 1. New England colonies, like Massachusetts and Connecticut. These colonies were known for their forests, fishing, and small farms. People here often worked together as communities. 2. Middle colonies, like New York and Pennsylvania. These colonies were known as the breadbasket because they grew lots of wheat and grain. There were also many different cultures and religions here. 3. Southern colonies like Virginia and Georgia. These colonies had large farms called plantations, where crops like tobacco, rice, and cotton were grown. Much of the hard work on these plantations was done by enslaved Africans, which was a tragic and cruel part of America's history. Life in the colonies. Life in the colonies wasn't easy. People had to build homes, grow their own food, and survive harsh winters. Families worked hard, and children often helped their parents on the farm. Schools were rare, and only a few children learned to read or write. But the colonies were also full of hope. People came here because they wanted religious freedom, land, and opportunities they didn't have in Europe. Some colonies, like Pennsylvania, were even founded as safe places for people of all religions. Conflict with Britain. Even though the colonies were in America, they were still ruled by Britain. The King of England, King George III, made the laws for the colonies, and the colonists had to pay high taxes to Britain. The colonists started to feel angry. They didn't have any say in the British government, so they said, "No taxation without representation." This means they didn't want to pay taxes unless they could have a voice in making the laws. One famous example of this anger was the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Colonists dressed up like Native Americans snuck onto British ships and threw boxes of tea into the water. They were protesting a tax on tea. The road to independence. By the mid-1700s, the colonists were tired of being controlled by Britain. They wanted to be free to make their own laws and decisions. In 1775, a war began between the colonies and Britain. This was called the American Revolution. The colonists were led by brave leaders like George Washington, who became the commander of the American Army. Another important figure was Thomas Jefferson, who wrote a very famous document called the Declaration of Independence. This document, written on July 4th, 1776, declared that the colonies were no longer part of Britain. It said that all people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This was a bold move because it meant the colonies were now at full war with one of the most powerful countries in the world. The war was tough. The British Army was big, well-trained, and had lots of weapons. The American colonists were farmers, shopkeepers, and regular people with little training. But they had something important: a strong belief in freedom. They received help from France, which provided soldiers, weapons, and ships. After years of fighting, the Americans finally won an important battle in Yorktown, Virginia, in 1781. 2 years later, in 1783, Britain officially recognized the United States of America as an independent country. The United States is born after the war. The leaders of the new country wrote the Constitution, which is a set of rules for how the country should work. They also elected George Washington as the first president of the United States in 1789. This was the beginning of a new country built on the ideas of freedom, equality, and democracy. However, these ideas didn't apply to everyone at the time. Enslaved people, women, and Native Americans were not treated equally, and it would take many years of struggle to make progress toward true equality. Now that the United States of America was born, it was time to grow. But this growth wasn't simple. It involved new opportunities, difficult challenges, and a dark chapter in American history: slavery. The expansion of the United States. After the War of Independence, the United States was still small. It was made up of just 13 states along the East Coast. But Americans had big dreams. They wanted to expand westward and explore the vast lands of North America. In 1803, something extraordinary happened. President Thomas Jefferson bought a huge piece of land from France. This was called the Louisiana Purchase, and it doubled the size of the United States. This land stretched from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains and opened up endless opportunities for farming, trade, and exploration. To learn more about this new land, Jefferson sent 2 explorers, Lewis and Clark, on a journey. With the help of a Native American woman named Sacagawea, they traveled across rivers, mountains, and plains, mapping the land and meeting Native American tribes. The push westward. The idea of moving west became known as Manifest Destiny. Many Americans believed it was their destiny, or